You know that feeling when you're scrolling through your phone at 2 in the morning and you realize you've been looking at other people's lives for hours, but you haven't actually talked to anyone, haven't messaged anyone, haven't reached out to a single person even though you feel completely alone. And the strange thing is you have hundreds of contacts, thousands of connections, more ways to communicate than any generation in human history. But somehow none of that translates into actual connection, into someone you could call right now who would answer, into a conversation that goes deeper than surface pleasantries and performance. We're living through something unprecedented, a loneliness epidemic happening at the exact same time as we're more connected than we've ever been, and that paradox is destroying people in ways we're only beginning to understand, because loneliness isn't just an emotional problem. It's not just feeling sad or isolated, it's a physical health crisis that impacts your body the same way smoking does. It shortens your lifespan, weakens your immune system, increases inflammation, raises your risk of heart disease and dementia, and yet we treat it like it's just a feeling, like it's something you should be able to fix by going out more or joining groups or downloading another app. The loneliness epidemic isn't about being physically alone, it's about being psychologically isolated even when you're surrounded by people. It's about having 1,000 shallow connections but no deep ones. It's about performing connection on social media while feeling completely unseen in real life. It's about the gap between how connected we appear and how lonely we actually feel, and that gap is getting wider every year. And most of us are suffering through it in private, convinced that everyone else has figured out how to connect, and we're the only ones failing. Here's what happened. We replaced depth with breadth. We traded a few meaningful relationships for hundreds of surface-level ones. We swapped long conversations for quick comments. We exchanged vulnerability for curated performance. And somewhere in that trade we lost the thing that actually creates connection, which is presence, which is time, which is showing up as your actual self rather than your best self, which is being seen fully rather than being liked widely. Think about your friendships from 10 years ago versus now. Think about how often you used to talk to people, really talk, not text but talk. Not quick updates but actual conversations where you said things you hadn't figured out yet, where you were messy and uncertain and real. And compare that to now, where most of your relationships exist in these weird half spaces, where you know what people are doing because you see their posts but you don't actually know how they're feeling, where you could tell someone about their vacation or their promotion but you couldn't tell them what they're actually struggling with because nobody shares that anymore. Nobody's real anymore. Everyone's just performing a version of themselves that looks like they have it together. And the terrible thing is we're doing this to ourselves. We're choosing the curated connection over the messy real one. We're choosing the like over the phone call. We're choosing the broadcast over the conversation, because real connection is hard. It's vulnerable. It requires time and presence and the willingness to be seen as you actually are rather than as you want to be perceived. And we've built an entire infrastructure that lets us avoid that lets us feel connected without actually connecting, that lets us be seen without actually being known. Social media promised us connection, but what it actually delivered was performance. It gave us a stage where we could broadcast our highlights and receive validation without ever having to be vulnerable, without ever having to show the parts of ourselves that don't photograph well. And we've all become so good at this performance that we've forgotten how to be real with each other. We've forgotten how to have conversations that don't have an audience. We've forgotten what it feels like to be known rather than just liked. I'll give you an example. Imagine you're having a hard week, like genuinely struggling with something. Maybe work is overwhelming, or you're questioning your relationship, or you just feel lost and you don't know why. And you open your phone and you see everyone else looking happy, looking successful, looking like they have it figured out. And your instinct isn't to reach out and say, "Hey, I'm struggling." Your instinct is to post something that makes it look like you're fine too, because that's what we do now. We perform okay even when we're not. We curate strength even when we're falling apart. And the result is everyone's alone together. Everyone's struggling privately while performing publicly, and nobody knows that everyone else is doing the same thing. This is how loneliness becomes epidemic, not because we don't have people in our lives, but because we can't be real with them. Not because we don't communicate, but because we've replaced actual communication with performance. Not because we're physically isolated, but because we're emotionally isolated even when we're surrounded by others. And this kind of loneliness is worse than being alone, because at least when you're alone you know why you feel lonely. But when you're surrounded by connections and still feel alone, you start to think something's wrong with you, that you're broken somehow, that everyone else knows how to connect and you don't. The shift happened gradually, so gradually that most of us didn't notice we were losing something until it was already gone. We added friends on social media and we stopped calling them. We started texting instead of visiting. We started liking posts instead of having conversations. And each individual change seemed small, seemed like progress even, seemed like we were staying more connected. But what we were actually doing was replacing high bandwidth connection with low bandwidth connection. We were trading depth for convenience, and convenience won because depth is hard and convenience is easy, and we're all tired and overwhelmed and looking for the path of least resistance. But here's what we didn't realize. Those small shallow interactions don't actually satisfy the need for connection. They create the illusion of connection while leaving you fundamentally alone. It's like eating empty calories, like you're consuming something but you're not actually nourished, and you can consume an infinite amount of shallow connection and still be starving for real intimacy. Still be desperately lonely despite having thousands of people in your network. Because what you need isn't more connections, it's deeper ones. It's someone who knows you, actually knows you, who you can be uncertain and messy and scared with, who you don't have to perform for. And we've lost that. Most of us have lost that, or we're in the process of losing it. We have work friends who we're friendly with but not real with. We have social media friends who we update but don't confide in. We have family who we see on holidays but don't talk to about anything that matters. And we're all just floating in this space of shallow connection, wondering why we feel so alone. Wondering what's wrong with us that we can't seem to build the kinds of friendships we used to have. Not realizing that it's not us, it's the system. It's the way we've structured our lives and our relationships and our communication that makes depth almost impossible. The weird thing about modern loneliness is that it looks nothing like what we think loneliness looks like. It doesn't look like someone sitting alone in an empty room with no friends. It looks like someone with a full social calendar who still feels completely disconnected. It looks like someone who's constantly texting but never actually talking. It looks like someone surrounded by people who would call themselves friends, but who doesn't have anyone they could call at 3 in the morning when they're falling apart. And this invisible loneliness is harder to address because from the outside everything looks fine, looks normal, looks like connection, so nobody intervenes and the person suffering thinks they must be doing something wrong because they have all the ingredients for connection but somehow it's not working. Part of what makes this so hard is that we've confused contact with connection. We've started measuring relationships by frequency of interaction rather than depth of intimacy, so someone who likes all your posts and sends you memes feels like a close friend even though you've never had a real conversation with them. Even though they don't know what keeps you up at night or what you're actually afraid of or what you want from your life beyond the curated version you show online. And this confusion means we're investing time and energy into relationships that feel like connection but don't actually provide what connection is supposed to provide, which is the sense of being known, being seen, being understood by another human being. Real connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is terrifying. It means showing someone the parts of yourself you're not proud of, the fears you don't want to admit, the ways you're struggling that don't fit the image you've cultivated. And there's always the risk that they'll reject you, that they'll see the real you and decide you're not worth knowing. And that risk feels unbearable, so we just don't take it. We keep things surface level. We perform the version of ourselves that we think will be accepted, and we end up with relationships that feel safe but empty. Connections that don't threaten us but also don't fulfill us. And here's the thing. Everyone is doing this. Everyone is performing and hiding and keeping it surface level, which means we're all protecting ourselves from the exact connection we're desperate for. We're all afraid of the same rejection, so we all stay behind our walls, and the result is universal loneliness. A world full of people who want deeper connection but are too scared to initiate it, too afraid to be the first one to be real, too worried that vulnerability will be met with judgment rather than reciprocity. I think about this a lot when I'm in groups of people who all know each other, like at a party or a networking event or even just hanging out with people I've known for years, and there's this surface-level conversation happening, this performance of being social and engaged. But underneath it there's this profound loneliness, this awareness that we're all just playing roles and nobody's actually being real. And sometimes I want to just stop and say something true, something vulnerable, something that breaks the performance, but the social contract is so strong, the pressure to keep it light and comfortable is so intense, that I just keep performing too. And the moment passes, and everyone goes home feeling alone despite having been surrounded by people all night. The loneliness epidemic is also about losing third spaces, those places where you could just exist with others without it having to be about consumption or productivity or networking, places like community centers or libraries or parks where you could have casual repeated interactions with the same people over time and slowly build actual relationships. But we've systematically eliminated most of those spaces. We've made everything transactional, everything about extracting value. And the few third spaces that remain are usually designed to make you spend money, to move you through quickly, to discourage lingering. So there's nowhere to just be with other people in an unstructured way, nowhere to develop the kind of organic connection that comes from repeated low-stakes encounters. And without those third spaces, without those opportunities for casual connection, the only relationships we build are either professional, where there's a power dynamic and an agenda, or social, where we have to actively plan and schedule and coordinate, and both of those require so much more effort than just running into someone regularly at a place you both frequent, and that effort becomes a barrier, becomes another thing on the to-do list, another source of stress, so we just don't do it. We stay home, we stay isolated. We tell ourselves we're too busy or too tired when really what we are is overwhelmed by how much work it takes to connect in a world that's eliminated all the easy ways to do it. Technology was supposed to solve this, was supposed to make connection easier and more accessible. And in some ways it has. You can maintain relationships across distance that would have been impossible before. You can find communities of people who share your interests no matter how niche. You can reach out to someone instantly no matter where they are. But what technology can't do is replace presence. Can't replace the kind of connection that happens when you're in the same physical space with someone, reading their body language, feeling their energy, having those moments of silence that aren't awkward because you're comfortable enough with each other to just exist together without filling every second with words. Digital connection is better than no connection, absolutely, but it's not the same as in-person connection, and treating it as equivalent is part of what's making us so lonely. Because we think we're maintaining relationships through texts and likes and comments when what we're actually doing is maintaining awareness of each other. We know each other still exist and what you're up to generally, but we don't really know each other anymore. Don't know how you've changed or what you're struggling with or who you're becoming. And that kind of shallow maintenance doesn't satisfy the deep human need for intimate connection, for being truly known by another person. The other thing technology does is it makes comparison constant and unavoidable, which intensifies loneliness because now you're not just lonely, you're lonely while seeing everyone else appear to have rich social lives, appear to be surrounded by friends and community and connection, and even though logically you know those are curated highlights, even though you know you're doing the same thing yourself, posting the moments when you're with people and not posting the hours you spend alone, it still feels real, still makes your loneliness feel like a personal failing, like everyone else figured out how to build community and you're the only one who can't. And this comparison creates a vicious cycle because the lonelier you feel, the more you withdraw, the more you convince yourself that you're not good at connection or that people don't like you or that there's something wrong with you that makes you unlikable, and those beliefs become self-fulfilling because they make you less likely to reach out, less likely to be vulnerable, less likely to take the social risks that connection requires. So you become more isolated, which confirms the belief that you're bad at connection, which makes you more isolated. And breaking that cycle requires recognizing that it's not actually about you, it's about the structure of modern life that makes connection difficult for everyone. But recognizing that doesn't necessarily make it easier to fix, because even if you understand intellectually that loneliness is epidemic, that it's systemic, that everyone's struggling with it, you still have to do the terrifying, vulnerable work of actually reaching out, actually being real with people, actually taking the social risks that might lead to deeper connection, and that's hard. That requires overriding years of conditioning that taught you to perform rather than be authentic, that taught you to protect yourself rather than be vulnerable, that taught you to keep things surface level rather than go deep. So what does it actually look like to break out of this, to move from shallow performance to real connection? Because it's not as dramatic as you might think. It doesn't require some massive vulnerable confession or finding a soulmate or moving to a commune. It starts small. It starts with tiny decisions to be a little more real with the people already in your life. A little more honest about how you're actually doing instead of defaulting to fine. A little more willing to stay on the phone a few minutes longer and actually say something true. It starts with noticing the moments when you could go deeper but you choose not to. When someone asks how you're doing and instead of saying fine you could actually answer. When a conversation drifts toward something real and instead of letting it pass you could follow it. When you feel the impulse to reach out to someone and instead of dismissing it you actually do it, because those moments happen all the time but we let them go. We let the door close on them because keeping it open feels too risky. I remember a time when I was going through something difficult and I almost didn't tell anyone about it, almost just swallowed it and performed being fine because that's what I always did. But something in me was tired enough that I actually said something honest to a friend, said, "Hey, I'm actually not doing great." And the silence that followed was terrifying for about 2 seconds before they said me too, and that was it. That was the moment. Two people admitting they were struggling, and somehow that made both of them feel less alone. And it wasn't some grand vulnerable moment, it was just 2 words. Me too. But those 2 words created more connection than months of likes and comments and surface-level check-ins ever had. That's what real connection actually is. It's not always deep philosophical conversations about the meaning of life. It's those small moments of honesty, those brief windows where 2 people are actually real with each other instead of performing, and the accumulation of those moments over time is what builds genuine intimacy, is what turns acquaintances into friends. is what makes you feel like you actually know and are known by another person. But you have to be willing to go first. That's the hardest part, because someone has to break the performance, someone has to say something real, and there's always the risk that the other person won't reciprocate, won't meet your honesty with their own, will just kind of brush past it or change the subject or give you some surface-level response that makes you regret being vulnerable, and that risk is real, it does happen. But the alternative, staying behind your wall forever, never risking anything, never experiencing real connection, is worse, is lonelier, is a slower and quieter kind of pain. The other thing that helps is being more intentional about which relationships you invest in, because not every connection needs to be deep. Some relationships are meant to be light and casual, and that's fine, but you need at least a few that go deeper, a few people who know the real version of you, and if you don't have those, you have to actively build them. Have to choose people who feel safe and invest the time and vulnerability it takes to move past the surface. This might mean saying yes to things that feel uncomfortable, might mean initiating plans instead of always waiting to be invited, might mean asking people how they're really doing and actually listening to the answer instead of just waiting for your turn to talk, might mean being the one who says something honest first even when it's scary, because depth doesn't happen accidentally, it doesn't just appear, it has to be built deliberately, and it starts with someone deciding to go deeper. And here's something I think we forget about connection. It's not just about the big moments, it's about showing up consistently. It's about being present with the people in your life, actually being there when you're with them instead of half watching your phone, actually listening when they talk instead of just waiting for a gap to fill with your own experience, actually paying attention to the small things they say that reveal how they're actually feeling underneath the performance. Connection is also about creating space for others to be real, which means being a safe person to be real with, which means not judging when someone admits difficulty, not immediately offering solutions or silver linings, not making their struggle about you, just being there, just witnessing, just saying I see you and that's okay and you don't have to pretend with me, and that kind of presence, that kind of space, is becoming increasingly rare, which is exactly why loneliness is increasing. The loneliness epidemic isn't going to be solved by an app or a platform or a technological innovation. It's going to be solved by people choosing, one conversation at a time, to be a little more real with each other, to take a little more risk, to value depth over convenience, to prioritize being known over being comfortable, and that's a quiet revolution. It doesn't look like anything from the outside. It looks like two people having an actual conversation. It looks like someone saying I'm not fine and someone else saying that's okay. It looks like presence and honesty and the willingness to be imperfect in front of another human being. If this documentary made you think about the relationships in your life, about the connections you have and whether they're actually giving you what you need, about the loneliness you might be carrying privately while performing okay publicly, then I'd ask you to do one thing. Not a big thing, not something dramatic, just one small thing. Reach out to someone today, not a text, not a like. Actually reach out and be a little more real than you normally would be, and see what happens, because the epidemic doesn't have to be permanent. The isolation doesn't have to be the end of the story, but changing it starts with you deciding that you're worth being known and that the people in your life are worth knowing for real. And if this is the kind of honest conversation about human behavior and psychology that you've been looking for, then make sure you subscribe, because this is what we do here. We don't sugarcoat, we don't motivate with empty positivity, we just look at the uncomfortable truths about how we live and why and what we might do differently. And if that resonates with you, I'd like to keep making it for you.